Our scripture reading for today is taken from Luke 14, verses 25 through 33. It can be found in your Pew Bible on page 908. The cost of discipleship. Now great multitudes accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife and children, and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and take counsel whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends an embassy and asks terms of peace. So therefore, whoever of you does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." This is the word of the Lord.
So over the past number of weeks, quite a few weeks, we've been working through different epistles. We were in Galatians, we were in Colossians, we were most recently in Hebrews, and so we're going to shift focus and attack for the next couple of weeks. We're going to attack head on one of the most problematic issues that I think that we have to deal with. It's one of the least popular places for us to go. I've never met a pastor who likes to talk about the topic we have this month, and I have met very few parishioners that enjoy hearing what Scripture has to say and what it means for us on the topic of our possessions. Nonetheless, Scripture has some important messages about these things we fill our life with, and what they say about who we are, where we're going, how we value ourselves and each other. So for the next month, we're going to deal with our possessions. And we need to do that with an open heart, an open mind, because the words are not easy to say, and they're not easy to hear. And this topic in particular is one in which we all have something to learn, and something to change about ourselves and how we relate to the world around us. Now, Luke's gospel, of course, is one of our favorites, right? Some of our favorite stories from the life of Jesus come from Luke. Imagine Christmas without shepherds or baby in a manger. Can you imagine church without the stories of Zacchaeus or Mary and Martha or the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son? All of these found only in Luke. It's filled with these important and amazing visual pictures of Jesus, of who Jesus was and how life-changing his message would be. But the words we hear today are not on anyone's favorites list. In fact, for a lot of us, I think we would just as soon get rid of them entirely. They're sharp, and they're direct, and they're accusatory. In many ways, they're the opposite of what we want to hear. And yet, here they are, written down. They're necessary. So open your hearts and minds as you think about the difficulty in these words, because they're tough words. There's no way around that. Yet, I think as people, we usually try to find some way around these tough words because we don't want to face the meaning that we fear might really be there. And there are a couple of ways that we've tried to do this. Can you blame us? Hate your mother, your father, your sister, your brother? Give up all your possessions? Is Jesus some kind of a cult leader? So that's one way, right? That's one way we deal with it. We balk at even the suggestion. We stand offended at the premise itself. We reject the offense and the offender. Another response is to say that Jesus really didn't mean what he seems to have said at all. He must have meant something more like, love me more than anything, or try your best, or don't focus on things. This is also a common response, especially in preaching and in the commentaries that we read. So we could call this evading the offense. But in evading the offense, we also evade Jesus. And there's a third approach, which is to impose an ethic of balance or tension. We have to balance our love for Jesus with our love for our family. We have to live with the tension of faithfulness to God on the one hand and duty to others on the other, being sure not to go too far in either direction, lest we become completely faithless, with duty to others being our only import, or we cause ourselves foolish harm, like carrying a cross. We need to be prudent with our possessions, giving out of overflow perhaps, but certainly not giving it all. This third way completely ignores both the offense and the offender. Jesus never once, anywhere in Scripture, calls us to live in balance or tension. Greek philosophers did that. Many others did that, but Jesus never does. Jesus calls us to follow him. And the qualifications that Jesus puts forward for being his disciples were and are offensive and radical. But they're his conditions, and he considers whom he will trust as disciples. They're not our conditions. We don't get to choose whether we want to follow. Well, we get to choose if we want to follow this demanding master, but we don't get to choose the conditions. Our job as disciples is not to dumb down his demands or make them easier to swallow, but to accept the radicality of his challenge. And if we want him to choose us, then he expects us to live by it. And so that leaves us really no better than when we started. Actually, we may be worse off because we've eliminated the easy ways out. The only option it would seem that we have now is to take these words for what they are, even if we don't want to. How can we come to church, we say, and leave with a message of hating our family, of giving away everything we have? I don't know how you go to church and leave with that message. But I can tell you that few of you will be back next week if that's the message you go home with today. So where do we go? It's hard to think of ourselves without our possessions, isn't it? Just think about it. How much of who you are is made up of what you have? My father always had his pickup truck. Always. And I remember when I was young, he would tell me that he loved Fords. He had to have a Ford. Sure, a Chevy wasn't worthless. You could do worse, like a Toyota or a Honda or any other truck that was under the category he called rice eater. My father was not the most politically correct individual. But then one day, my mom got a Toyota. And well, long story short, it turned out he liked rice better than he thought he did. So he became a Toyota man. We all have our things. Personally, I like Coca-Cola. I'll drink Pepsi, but I prefer Coke. We all have our preferences. And while some of them we can do without, there are other things that are not too easy to lay by the wayside. We've become accustomed to thinking of certain things as essential that really aren't that essential. We need clothes, but do we need so many outfits? We need food, but do we need it in the excess in which we usually enjoy it? These things have come to be more luxuries than necessities for us. And in making that transition, we've allowed them to affect our lives more than they ought to. It might help to think of some of these things in a new way. John Wesley, of course, the founder of the Methodist movement, tells of an experience like this. He tells the story of the time that he discovered, to his shame, that he was more in allegiance to his possessions than his call to be in ministry. He was faced with a girl likely to freeze to death because she didn't have adequate clothing and it was winter. And he realized two things in that moment. First, he didn't have the money on him at that moment to change her situation. And second, he did have assets in his home, such as draperies and paintings on his walls, that, had he not purchased them, would have enabled him to have money to give her that day. Out of this, he calls Methodists everywhere to see your expensive clothing in the same light, your gown, your hat, your headdress, everything about you which cost more than Christian duty required you to lay out is the blood of the poor. Those are some more tough words. Another example, if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List, you may remember the final scene where Oskar Schindler comes to berate himself for not having bought the freedom and lives of more people from certain doom when he could have used his resources more wisely or sold more of his possessions and done so. And if we begin to think about it this way, it makes sense. Did you ever wonder why monastic communities have typically required a vow of poverty? It's not to show off. It's not to live simply, as if living simply in and of itself were a salutary virtue. It's to ensure that the community as a whole can give as much of what it earns through its labor and commerce to enrich the lives of those around them. That's why John Wesley and Francis Asbury died virtually penniless. Everything they received beyond what they needed to live off of, they gave to those who had need of it. And that's why John Wesley urged early Methodists to earn all they could and save all they could. And by save, he meant avoid needless spending. He didn't mean hoarding. He encouraged all Methodists to do that so that they could give all they could, all that they could. But there's even more to the story than that. In each case, these individuals realized that giving all they could requires a conscious decision to do so. So keep that in mind while I look at the next important point that Jesus is making. The actual word Jesus uses when he talks about hating your father or mother, your sister or brother, the word in Greek that is used in Luke's gospel is misio. This word in some other passages is used to convey a lesser form of love. Some of the church fathers were said to love one of their wives but hate the others. Similarly, God was once described as loving Jacob but hating Esau. And so these verses utilize hate not as some wild-eyed, loathing fury, but as a lesser secondary attachment. Matthew's gospel may have conveyed this nuance a bit better in his version of this from Matthew chapter 10. Whoever loves his family more than me cannot be my disciple. Now, if this nuance of hate is correct, it helps explain why Jesus could say something about a disciple's family that's at variance with the law of God as well as with other sayings of Jesus himself. After all, in accordance with God's law, which Jesus came to fulfill, not abolish, Jesus frequently upheld a marriage relationship. And he often talked about a respect for parents. Perhaps that's why the balance of the New Testament urges believers to have good family relationships. So if that's the case, what do these words mean for us? Well, perhaps one way we can understand them better is to take them to the cross. Now, this notion of cross-bearing is one of the most commonly misapplied of all of Jesus' sayings. In our popular imagination, it's the stuff of, pious platitudes, such that a man can point to his arthritis or his wayward son or his less than fulfilling job and say, well, I guess that's my cross to bear in life. When we use that image in that way, it washes out the meaning of Jesus' image in Scripture here, because in Jesus' world, bearing your cross is something When we use the term the way that we use it, my arthritis is my bear to cross, it is it's a recognition of something that is happening to us instead of something we choose. But in Jesus' day, to bear a cross was not something that happened. It was something that resulted from a choice that was made. And when Jesus uttered his words about bearing a cross, everyone knew what he meant, because in Jesus' day, there's only one kind of person who walked around with a crossbar draped over his shoulders, a condemned man on his way to die. There's a totality to cross-bearing. It's a putting to death of all that is sinful and worldly in favor of all that is sacrificial and God-glorifying. Being under a death sentence affects everything. The gospel involves a constant putting aside of self in favor of seeing all of life through the lens of service to God. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And it's important to know that up front. Because as Jesus looked out that day and scanned the large crowds attending him, he wanted to be honest in laying out the cost of discipleship. Because it's a cost that most who want to follow Jesus are not willing to pay. The problem is we claim credit for following Christ, but few of us ever really have to pay the full membership fee, because it's almost unthinkable for us to do that much. So is God asking you to go and give away everything you have? Well, that's for you to decide. In all honesty, he might want that from some people, and he might want something else from other people. And only you can decide with prayer what it is that you're being called to do. Giving away everything is more than a bit extreme, more than a bit radical, and more than a bit foolish in our consumer culture. But that being said, what God asks of us and what Jesus needs from us is always going to be more than we really want to give. The road of a disciple is not paved with golden stones, but with blood and sweat and tears. It's not until we get to the end of that road that we ultimately find our redemption. So how do we recognize these ideas or reconcile these ideas in terms of our possessions and our relationships to them? One of my favorite answers to this question comes from one of my favorite theologians, St. Augustine. And I know I talk about him a lot. Get used to it. He one of the most prolific ancient writers of the church, and he has writings on just about everything, so there's always something that he can add to a conversation. But Augustine looks on this problem from the question of the relationship between good and evil. Augustine doesn't understand evil to be a thing, an entity, a substance. Rather, evil is simply the lack of that which is good. The way evil actions happen is that we, as imperfect human beings, choose the lesser good, meaning that there were things we could have done that would have brought us closer to God's truth, but we chose another way. Much of our lives can be understood in this light. We have constant temptations that threaten to keep us away from God. Even today, we could have chosen, you all could have chosen not to come to worship. And you may have been able to justify that decision. But you chose to be here. You made the right choice. This is the danger our possessions represent. When we put what we want to do, or to own, or to be before anything other than God, then we have chosen incorrectly. If any of you have a background in economics, then you know the term opportunity cost, right? Opportunity cost is when you have something that you need to do, but you have to realize not only maybe what financially it's going to cost to do that, but also the time that it's going to take, the resources that you're going to use. All of that stuff is factored into the total cost of something, right? So it's never just the financial cost, it's everything else as well. If you do this, you're not going to be able to do this other thing because it's going to take so many hours or so many days to get it done, and that's going to mean you can't do other things that you need. these choices. These are the things Jesus is talking about. These are the things that we so often let come between him and us. So as you go home today, throughout this week, think about what Jesus is saying to you in these words. Think about how you identify yourself. Are you a Coke or a Pepsi person? Are you a Toyota or a Ford family? What do you plan on doing with your savings? What is the challenge in your life today that God is calling you to recognize? And over this next month, we're going to ask ourselves these questions because that's our job. We're to make sure we identify ourselves not foremost as middle class or lower income, not foremost as residents of Clearfield or Phillipsburg or Hawk Run or Houtzdale, or not even foremost as United Methodists. But our first identity has to be a disciple of Christ. Anything less than that is essentially the same thing as standing by and watching Christ struggle with his cross. Should he carry it alone, or should he be alone on that journey at all? Or should we realize what it means to carry our cross and to join him on the way? And it is a difficult path, one that needs lots of prayer and sustenance. And the best way in worship that we can sustain ourselves and give ourselves the energy that we need is to eat together, especially the Lord's Holy Supper. And so we're going to do that now.